One of the biggest themes of life that the Qur'an constantly highlights through so many different examples and metaphors, إِنَّ فِي اخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ يُولِجُ اللَّيْلَ فِي النَّهَارِ يُخْرِجُ الْحَيَّ مِنَ الْمَيِّتِ وَيُخْرِجُ الْمَيِّتَ مِنَ الْحَيِّ. It talks about the changes in weather, the living coming from the dead coming from the living, the interchanging of night and day. Change is a really big theme of just life, right? And that's why the whole idea of the hereafter is permanence, right? There's no change there. But when it comes to this life, when it comes to this world, change is maybe the dominant theme, right? And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights it through so many different examples that are all around us, that we observe, that we experience. And so the human being, while we're experiencing all this physical change, there's also the question of the metaphysical change. There's also the question of the spiritual change. How do we actually change our conditions, and how do we better our situation, and how do we constantly are talking about this, right? I got to change myself. I got to reform myself. I got to correct myself, rectify myself. So this discussion of change is a really important discussion. It's a really deep, actually a very deep philosophical discussion. And kind of at the crux of this whole conversation is the verse in Surah Al-Ra'd, Surah number 13, ayah number 11, in which, because we're human beings, because we are these physical creatures living in this physical world, we oftentimes become very obsessed with everything that's around us, the zahir, to use an Arabic term, which is the external. We become very concerned with the external. How do we externally change our situation, individually, as a family, as a community, as an ummah? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the cipher and gives us the key to that in the Qur'an, in this verse in particular, where Allah says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ, that Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves, until they're willing to change themselves. And so I wanted to have a little bit of that discussion today about what that change represents and how do we perceive, interact, understand, and then implement that change in real life.
I don't like change that much. I get really nervous.
Eat the same thing for breakfast every single day.
Yeah. I'm kind of just happy the way things are.
Yeah, exactly.
You can guess where I'll be like at 10 o'clock at night. I don't know. I feel like obviously in the way you framed it, mashallah, it was like a spiritual, metaphysical, internal change. I was just, as you were talking, I remember the statement that I heard one of my teachers once mentioned, that if revolutions occurred through words, we'd have a revolution every morning and evening.
Wow.
But they happen through internal change and action. That's why they're so rare.
Wow.
And that connects to the ayah, حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That you actually don't need to worry about massive global legacy. You don't need to worry about changing the world. As long as a person works on developing what they want to see outside internally, they bring that change here, then slowly those around them will see it, and the influence won't be artificial. It won't be through paid ads. Change won't happen like that. Rather, the influence will be very natural, organic. People will be inspired and see that this person's living a life by better values. And I want to be where they are. What are some examples of change that you've seen in your life? People around you, families, where someone took like a complete 180?
I think one of the biggest changes people experience is like emotional change, the roller coaster of the heart. And in Arabic, the word qalb kind of signifies that change. And that's why the dua that we make is Ya muthabbit al-qulub, Ya muqallib al-qulub. We're talking to the one who makes that change, Allah. And it comes in a number of hadith that our hearts are kind of like a feather in the desert. It's just like moving this way and moving that way.
Tumbleweed.
Yeah, tumbleweed. And then interestingly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. When you're going through the changes of life, how do you get that firm rootedness? And it comes from remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But yeah, there's the emotional change, then there's the physical change of life where, I mean, living in the modern world, things are so unpredictable. You know, people at some point would grow up in a particular village and that would be their entire life. Nowadays, like as a young child, your parents are moving, then you're going to high school, you're switching from school to school, and then you're going to college. Then when you graduate, your job is taking you to a different state, perhaps a different country. Some people are getting married, going to a different place. It's just, I think the notion of change has intensified so much in the modern world. We're really living what it means to change. But Allah reminds us that amidst this change, don't lose yourself. Make sure you have some anchor.
Because if you're not anchored and if it's not meaningful change, haphazard change can cause destruction.
100%. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Institutions fall apart, organizations fall apart, families fall apart when people just let's change it all.
Yeah. There's no method to the madness. It's just pure madness. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because everything around me can change without me actually changing. So Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul, who was the leader of the hypocrites, who was a vile person, was a hypocrite, was a liar, was stabbing the Muslims in the back constantly. He was a hypocrite before Badr and he was a hypocrite after Badr. He remained the same, even though the situation was actively changing. He did not change, he remained the same. Or the other way around, that nothing around the person changes, but the person changes internally, right? So someone like Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Makkah was antagonistic towards Islam the first 3-4 years of the message of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Makkah remained antagonistic towards Islam for the next decade, but Umar changed in the midst of all of that.
And it's really interesting how Allah puts the onus on the individual. I mean, I'm guilty of this myself. Whenever there's a problem happening, we always assume it's someone else's fault.
Yeah.
We always try to point fingers and say,
I mean, it usually is though.
Usually it's Khair Naman's fault.
Yeah, and then like, just this realization that, just stop in your tracks and realize you have a big part to play in whatever's happening as well. So change yourself.
Right? Absolutely. Yeah, and it's just, we talk about this a lot of times, right? These different analogies that your experience of something actually has a lot more sometimes to do with yourself rather than the thing, right? If I am not taking care of my physical health and I walk a mile, it was a painful, excruciating, miserable experience. But if I'm actually taking care of my physical health and I walk that same mile, it was a beautiful walk outside. It went from being miserable to beautiful. And it was the same mile, but it was just, I was different.
Just the other day we were with Dr. Ross and we were sitting with the students and he was talking about when he was in Jordan, one of his teachers would, and we may have heard this from our teachers as well, like, all the problems in the world are happening because you aren't doing this, you're not doing tahajjud, you're not praying salah, the masajid aren't filled. From one angle, that does seem a bit like catastrophizing, like, you're putting blame on people who are somewhat innocent. But from another angle, there's this accumulative effect that like, yeah, maybe I'm not solely responsible for all the woes in the world, but my inactivity, my lack of connection to Allah, whatever oppression I'm creating, even on a micro scale, is contributing to the bigger thing.
It's not helping.
Yeah, and that's what when it's حتى لا يغيروا حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. Every nafs has to do that, and then collectively أنفسهم, then that change will come about. And we have this idea that like, yeah, who cares what's going to happen? I can only change myself so much. But Allah doesn't expect from us perfection. He expects from us to attempt towards perfection, the intention to make change. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shakir. Yeah. And we should never aspire to be perfect. Okay, listen, I can't change myself completely. I'm knee deep in all of the sins. My source of income is haram. My activities are unlawful. I do things that I'm ashamed of. Yeah, make one change and that can have like the butterfly effect. It will continue to ripple and ripple until you'll see the change. Maybe not today, but tomorrow perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And there ends up being a little, you were talking about earlier, even if we want to take it to the next step of the conversation about, well, okay, I'm bringing about this change in myself. Now I got to start to get other people on board. You were talking about it earlier that if I actually am able to inspire people through my own example, then that's actually going to create some kind of, impactful change. Otherwise, it's propaganda. You said it's like it's a paid ad. Yeah. right? So yeah, I stopped for like 10 seconds on that Instagram paid ad for yet another cat toy. But you know,
I don't relate to this at all.
yeah, exactly.
I don't relate to this at all.
But you know, that's it. It was 10 seconds. It didn't really. But if I come here and I actually see something a lot more useful or beneficial, right? You have a particular, you're using the tablet and being able to take notes on it and everything. I'm like, okay, I'm actually seeing this in action. This is actually helping you do X, Y, and Z. That's a lot more convincing to me. You know, I didn't see no paid ad on Instagram for the tablet that you're working on or the laptop that you're typing on, but I saw you actually getting work done with it. And that was a lot more convincing to me.
Do you have any tips on, like, you know, we talk about changing ourselves for the collective good. I don't know, what are some practical ways, 1 or 2 steps for, on a personal level, we can intend to change, but how do we allow that change to happen? Like, I don't know, from your personal experience.
Okay, so it's Ramadan, and I think this is the time where everyone's talking about change. And some practical tips would, inshallah, help us along that journey. One thing that I find to be beneficial is when we commit to change, you have to believe in it. If you don't believe in what you're doing, the struggle to get there will burn you out.
Yeah.
You have to really believe in it. That goes back to that famous hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that actions are based on intentions.
There's also like an aphorism from the early generations as well that said like niyatul mu'min khairu min amalihi. That sometimes just the resolve of the believer is more powerful than what you can actually do.
Change isn't easy. It's going to be very hard. It's like a person dieting, like a person working out. I remember reading something that Arnold Schwarzenegger himself wrote. That this guy's like, his arms are like this, right? And he's like, the guy is an accomplished bodybuilder. So he writes about how sometimes in the middle of the rep, it would be so painful that every whisper out there would be calling him to just put it down. But he said, so in order to push through the rep, what he would do is, he said, I would close my eyes and focus on what I want to be and just burn right through it.
Interesting.
You got to believe in it. You got to really believe in it, whether you're getting choked.
Why the choke? Why are you looking at me at that? Why not the one who's choking somebody else?
There's a jiu-jitsu thing here.
Yeah.
Do you understand? So whether it's a sporting analogy or whatever it is, man, you have to really believe in what you're doing. The other thing that I would say is, and I think Shaykh was referencing this earlier, surrounding yourself by the right people. Sometimes your environment may not impact you, but more commonly, it does.
It does.
The people that you're with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you surround yourself by people that are going for Taraweeh, you're going to end up there.
Yeah.
If you surround yourself by people who take their marriage seriously, who understand patience, who respect their parents. I had a cousin. He's still alive. May Allah give him a long life. My mom used to say regarding him that Allah gave him all the rizq he has because of his love for his mom and dad.
Allah.
You know what I mean? So then throughout your entire life, every time I've had challenges individually with my own family, I always remember him. Razak Bhai, man. My mom used to always say regarding him that he was the guy that served his parents and Allah gave him barakah in his rizq for that. Inspiration.
Yeah. No, you were saying like it's Ramadan, right? If I'm hanging out with people who are gonna like have extended iftar parties, that's probably where I'm gonna end up. But if I'm sitting with people, I know, alhamdulillah, man. I do get those. But I'm able to successfully avoid them now.
Listen, ask the Taraweeh leader what's iftar. You know, like nobody eats food.
But if you're with a group of people who are gonna rush off to make it for Isha on time, you're gonna make it to Isha on time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember growing up, when I was young, I used to pray Salah in a really weird way, where I would stand up and like lean to one side. And it never struck me why I would do that. And then one day, my dad, he sees the way I'm praying. He's like, why do you keep doing this? I'm like, I don't know. And then I kept observing that my dad does it as well. But then I realized he had a hip surgery.
Oh, subhanAllah.
So like, he was doing it out of like his inability to stand straight. And then I started copying him because I keep observing this. And in Ramadan, it's like, everybody's fasting. Everybody's able to show what they're capable of. And you may not even realize it. And you know, you go to the masjid, you don't say Ameen loudly. And then after some time, everybody's doing it. So like you do it as well. Or, you know, the local masjid, you know, you used to praying 8, they're praying 20. And you're just like, okay, I don't want to be the only guy who stands up and walks away. Like just being in that good company in Ramadan, you may not be able to take everything with you out of Ramadan, but at least some of the vestiges of Ramadan will linger with you for the remainder of the year. And I think that's what we're all aiming for in that change.
You know, when we're talking about change, one thing that I feel like is an important realization is that the graph of change is not this. You got to get comfortable with the.
Wow.
Even that.
You got to get comfortable with this. If you don't get comfortable with this, you can't change.
Subhanallah.
You know what I mean? You got to get comfortable with the failures. You got to get comfortable with doing something right for 10 days and 11th day it doesn't work.
Good days and bad days. It's a part of it. Yeah, subhanAllah. To kind of wrap up, I was going to mention that, you know, changes, you started off by saying it's very normal, it's very natural. That's why Allah is constantly pointing it out to us in the natural world that's around us, night and day, morning and evening, the seasons, the weather, etc., etc. You know, even the Surah Al-Ra'd is full of all these kind of natural phenomena. وَالَّذِي يُرِيكُمُ الْبَرْقَ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا وَيُسَبِّحُ الرَّعْدُ بِحَمْدِهِ. It's talking about all these natural phenomena. So change is very natural, but it doesn't change the fact that it might also just be the scariest thing in this world, which is why it's such you know, an enigma. But it's very intimidating. It's very scary. But Ramadan is the perfect example of that. We get so scared, and I'll use this word, we get psyched out by the change. But in actuality, if we look at Ramadan right now, we completely changed everything in our lives. Our sleeping schedule has changed. Our eating schedule has changed. Our work schedule has changed. Everything has changed, right? So in actuality, we're proving to ourselves, not for 1 or 2 or 3 or 7 days, for 30 days, we can actually change. So we need to take this encouragement from the month of Ramadan that change is possible. I can actually change, and take that message forward. As they say, you know, be the change that you want to see in the world, that it does start with us, and through our own example, we'll be able to inspire others as well. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this Ramadan a month of transformation and a month of change for the better for all of us. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakumullah khairan.